Solos, we're clear for takeoff. Solos, ready to rock Seattle, boss. Boss, we're clear for takeoff. Winds are 320 and 5. That's the headline.
In the diamond aileron roll, the jets fly a diamond formation. Then, on command from Boss Bartlett, they spin 360 degrees in unison.
We're behind the rails, and up to Delta roll, Boss 570. For 9.5 16, let's fire it up over the lake.
Good morning. My name is Anthony Franco. I'm with Effective UI. Today we're going to discuss how we took that, which is what we call a vision demo at Effective UI, how we took that as a vision a year ago and turned it into a reality, which is the Navy Blue Angels website. Not only is it a website, but it is sorry. It's a site that's a Silverlight site, very immersive site that works obviously on desktops, but we had to make it 508 accessible. We had to have it make sure it worked on smartphones and tablets that didn't support Silverlight. And Microsoft basically brought two incredible teams together. They brought a very highly trained, skilled team of professionals that had the coolest job in the world and the Navy Blue Angels. I'm glad you guys got that joke. I was worried about drinking last night if you guys were going to get that. Anyway, so in essence, what you're going to hear today is you're going to hear from the project manager, Cindy. She's going to talk about how she coordinated all the teams together. You're going to hear from Ramon, the designer, who designed the site and worked with the technology teams, and you're going to hear from two different people within the technology and content production teams. Chad is going to speak about Silverlight and the stuff we had to do with getting the site up and running from a technical perspective, as well as Tony, who not only led the charge on creating all the 3D content and how that worked, but also he was stuck with the task of trying to make HTML5 site work. And then we're going to get together at the end and kind of have an open discussion about some of the challenges we saw, and then open it up to conversation with you guys. So if you see something that doesn't sit right with you, or we didn't cover something in a section, please write it down. We're going to have plenty of time for Q&A later. And with that, I'll introduce Cindy.
I was thinking of jumping up, but it's not like I would trip and fall. And you guys might get a laugh. I would bruise my shin. Okay, so I'm Cindy Vanover, and I'm an interactive program manager with Effective UI. And if you're wondering what an interactive program manager is, doesn't mean that I'm going to light up or dance if you click on me. Although I do get a little bit animated at times when I'm supporting the project and things maybe aren't going to plan. But I can say that with this project, we had a bit of that, but at the end of the day, things went pretty well to plan. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of set the stage. You're going to hear more from the rest of the team today, and I'll kind of give you the big picture. Okay, Project Pensacola, People and Places. Probably wondering why it's called Project Pensacola. A lot of that just has to do, that was our sort of internal project name, because as you saw from the photo earlier, we all did start off in Pensacola, Florida, at the home site for the Navy Blue Angels. So to talk a little bit about who's who, just so you have a lay of the land, we had Microsoft, who was the primary. We have two primary clients here. So basically Microsoft, who did come to Effective UI and engage us, so that asked us to help build this site. And then obviously the Blue Angels, who ultimately are going to own the site and live with it for the next number of years. And that was a little bit of an interesting, we'll talk about the dynamics around that, but having a couple of different clients that were really very strong stakeholders. In addition to that, we had a number of stakeholders that were helpful for us. The virtual Blue Angels, for example, are an interesting group. They basically are a very enthusiastic group of aviation, they use flight simulation, basically, and they emulate the Blue Angels via virtual and slideshows, and the thing that's amazing about them is they are very much subject matter experts. They would, if you didn't know they weren't a real Blue Angel, you would probably never know that. Their expertise was very helpful for us, and the reason that becomes important is because getting in touch with the actual Blue Angels while they're in the middle of their season can be difficult at times. So we had those gentlemen as our subject matter experts. We also were dealing with a number of sort of additional groups associated with the Navy. Sinatra is the chief. I'm gonna have to make sure I get these acronyms right. The Chief of Navy Air Training. Basically, there's a number of groups. DISA is the Defense Information Systems Agency. We also worked with a group called N6, which was basically the Communications and Telecom group. So there were a number of groups that were behind the scenes in terms of going to host the site. And as you might imagine, that required a fair amount of coordination. And then, of course, there's Effective UI, and we had a relatively distributed team as well. So we had a number of functional groups. Our design group was located in Rochester, New York. We're going to hear from one of our primary designers today. We had development was split between Georgia and Denver. And then with our video and 3D and then project management, we were primarily located in Denver. But essentially, the point here is really that it was a relatively large team, not exceedingly so, but there was enough of some interesting twists that it did keep things interesting. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what we were trying to do. For those of you that are familiar with the Blue Angels, their mission is really to promote the Navy and Marines, both for internal recruitment purposes, as well as basically presenting a face from a PR perspective out to either civilians or current enlisted or former Navy and Marine personnel. It's largely, again, a public relations branch where they do a lot of goodwill ambassador type of things. And so essentially the site had very much similar mission goals related to it. So our idea was to promote the Navy and the Marines and promote the Blue Angels. So we have a place on the site where we obviously tell a lot about the scheduling and where you can see a show. Also, the idea was to educate, so there's definitely a part of the site that has information about the teams, the history, the aircraft. So a lot of information, as you might imagine, there's a lot of folks that tend to want to have a lot of information, and they're, I would call them maybe aviation buffs or something. So they're very interested in that type of stuff. Obviously, excitement. Hopefully you saw from the vision demo at the beginning that what we're trying to do is harness some of the excitement that you might actually get at a show, or if you've already been there, or in fact entice you to go to one. And then again, I mentioned recruitment is really one of the primary goals of this site, both to recruit in a general sense, to bring interest to the Navy and Marines, and in a very specific sense, to recruit for the Blue Angels in specific. Now, the underlying note here to keep in mind is that in addition to these goals, again, if you think back that Microsoft engaged our team to build the site, there was clearly an additional objective of showcasing a lot of Microsoft technology, Silverlight, smooth streaming, HTML5, a lot of very sort of cutting-edge, sexy technologies. So a lot going on there. And what would a project be without project challenges, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about the project challenges. I'm going to talk about them, in a little bit of the more mundane high-level type of perspective, but really just to set the stage. Because even though some of the concepts I'm going to bring up are relatively mundane, I think that anybody who's been involved in one of these relatively large projects knows that a lot of these things can be deal breakers. So in classic project management speak, the whole concept of managing requirements and expectations, I really think it may seem obvious, but it is so crucial to a project's success. And especially when you have, as we did in this case, a couple of very different and very opinionated stakeholders, it's important to try to mind the gap. Where are we missing expectations where we might be meeting an expectation of one client and not the other? So as a specific example, I've already mentioned that for Microsoft, the goal was really to, let's showcase some of these really, to some degree, complex and new technologies. And I hope that by the end of the day today, you'll get a sense of how we were able to achieve that, and you'll see some of that complexity come together. But at the same time, for the Blue Angels, one of their primary requirements and expectations is that the site would be very, very easy to maintain and update, and they basically do not have a lot of time to do a lot of maintenance. And so that was a little bit of some requirements and expectations that were at odds with one another. So those are the types of things you have to really try to address. Another one of the project challenges that we had, you might not think that this would be a challenge, but sometimes you can have a little bit too much of a good thing. So especially in a site like this where we had a lot of design, a lot of asset-rich content, what we needed is we needed to know, Blue Angels, how do we best capture, what would you like us, how do you want us to portray you in this website? What we weren't expecting to get was boxes and boxes of hard media sent via FedEx. We got, it was unbelievable. I think that by virtue of the fact that the Blue Angels have a little bit of a group that transitions year to year, and so they don't always have a lot of consistency, they don't have set up internally necessarily a good media library. And so they had people running around and pulling up photographs and video clips, and some of them were edited and some of them weren't, and all different types of quality. So really, this was something that for us, not to be, it's not an uncommon challenge, but definitely something to be figured into time and energy needed to really sort through, manage, and choose from all of the assets and bring it together in a nice, consistent vision. When the information highway has speed bumps. Another interesting thing, so many of you here today, we're in a technology conference, we're used to fast, high bandwidth, FTP. We've gotten to a point where getting a lot of data back and forth is generally not too much of a challenge. What we found is that in working with the Blue Angels, by design, they have technical limitations. Many of them were working on older computers with, I think their standard is Internet Explorer 7, old platforms, and so essentially, and additionally, they often did not have access to, I don't know what it was, but we had a very difficult time getting them to work with us using FTP. So as I mentioned previously, we spent a lot of time FedExing and mail and things that a lot of us in this, lately, we haven't done that for a while, right? It's been a while since we had to go to the post office or pick something up from FedEx. Additionally, what happened is this project moved into the period where they were actually on the road. And when they were on the road, and they were, again, our primary subject matter experts, aside from the virtual Blue Angels that came in to help, they often were not having access, they didn't have high-speed internet access, or they would be traveling and they weren't exactly sure when they would have access. So in terms of doing reviews and getting feedback, that became quite a bit to plan for. So how did we overcome some of these things and, eventually rise to the challenge? What's going to happen is I'm just going to, again, talk on a couple of mundane but very important concepts. And then, of course, we'll put it to the team and they'll get to the really sexy stuff. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and talk about some of the things that made this a very successful endeavor. really love this quote. Teamwork is key. Now especially, and hopefully again at the end, by the time you see everything, you're going to see just how much the intersection of design and development had to come to play to make this project and this website come to fruition. And I'll tell you that without a very collaborative team effort, it would have never happened. It's not to be underestimated. And again, when you have sort of the time zone and the geographical challenges as well, it's still something that you really have to work towards. In terms of trying to create performance enhancements and stuff, I know that our team members talked about image compression. They really had to use, many brains is better than one in this case, for sure. And we had a wonderful team. So it's important, and I think it's important to let your team and encourage your team to have sometimes, some constructive but critical discussions. They didn't always agree, but ultimately that helped us get where we needed to get. Effective communication. This is also a very nice quote. You don't want your communication to be an illusion. And I think this is kind of one of those obvious things, but definitely, and the point I'll bring out here is when you do have sort of this two masters, Microsoft and Blue Angels, I think one of the challenges that I often had as a program manager and just trying to kind of keep all the cats herded was if we were speaking and we were communicating perhaps with our contact at Microsoft, often there was an assumption that that information was getting back to Major Burks, who was our primary contact at the Blue Angels. And I found out more than once that that wasn't always the case for various reasons. And so it really became a question of making sure that the left hand and the right hand, that everybody was on the same page and knew what each other was doing and talking about. And don't assume that if you've told one stakeholder and you've got an agreement about a requirement or an expectation, it's really important. Don't assume that that's necessarily been conveyed to the other parties. I think as a precaution, you should make sure that you ensure that communication has in fact taken place. I'm going to go ahead and read this quote because it's just a great one. Managers have powerful influence over events that facilitate or undermine progress. They can provide meaningful goals, resources, and encouragement, and they can protect their people from irrelevant demands, or they can fail to do so. And I think this happens at all levels in projects, but definitely from my perspective, I think that one of the biggest failures of a project/program manager is to not protect the team from being encouraged and enabled to do the best job that they can. So as a great illustration, let's take a look at what one of our famous. Let's see what Dilbert thinks about this. I have a question. Can the people in the back read this, or shall I read it in case you can't see it? Okay, so I'll just give you a minute to read it. So really my point here is just that, to my mind, this is somewhat a failure of protecting the team. Now, that's not to say that you're not going to occasionally have the long status meeting or the 3-hour meeting, or there's always going to be meetings. We hate meetings. But essentially, from my perspective, there's a lot more involved in successful project management that does not include necessarily a bunch of fancy words or long meetings. And I think that there's a lot to be done that's not essentially a task driver. So let's talk a little bit about that. So from my perspective, I think this is what you can expect from someone like me. So really, it is a question of teamwork, as I've already mentioned, listening, supporting, facilitating the work that needs to be done. I think that probably in this project, and I think hopefully most of you out there, if you're on a project team, can appreciate that having somebody who can actually run interference and be handling that communication and ensuring that the stakeholders are in fact in sync and essentially protecting the team from being taken off on a tangent is really important. And I think that that's something that our team needed to do. We needed to stay focused, especially with, and you'll see it again when you get in more into the detail, there's a lot of very exciting technology. So it could have been, it was very easy sometimes to go off on a tangent. So chasing down hurdles, mitigating risk, and essentially the vision that comes to my mind is having someone that runs around and keeps those plates spinning if they're on top of little sticks, and when one starts to wobble, rather than having the team have to worry about that, have somebody who can go and keep the plates spinning. Now, that's a little bit of a two-way street. So, super famous, push me, pull you from Doolittle fame, and I like to think that, what I'd like to suggest is that the relationship between your team and the project manager should be more of a help me help you. So what this really means is just the way that you can help a project manager or a program manager make you successful is to just really try to abide by some of these pretty obvious principles. If you're gonna take on tasks, commit to it, and then be honest with yourself and with the rest of your team. If you're taking on too much, let somebody know. Communicate, give feedback. I can't help you if I don't know that there's a problem. And I think that the enthusiasm is something that I think is really important. The thing to remember is that we're all in this together, right? So let's make it fun. Let's do what we can. And then the reason I bring up humility is that, and you guys are going to get a sense of this pretty quickly, I work with some very talented people, and there's a reason that they do what they do and I do what I do. And there were times where my team needed to spend time, walking through some concepts to help me understand and appreciate what was going on so that I could then either go get support or remove some type of challenge or whatever it is. So the idea here is for team members, for people out there that are working with a project or program manager, allow them to ask the dumb question, because sometimes that'll actually enable them to help you out. So if only it were this simple, right? Success is simple. Do what's right at the right time, the right way at the right time. I think we all know that this is not really the case. It's not that easy, but some really fundamental concepts that will help you get there is understand who your client is, understand the stakeholders and their expectations, manage to them, utilize your team, harness the brain trust, try to leverage each other to get to the right answer, and look to your management at various levels to help protect the team and let them know if that's not happening, if you need to reduce scope or push back, and ultimately have fun with it. So now, with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce the next person. So basically now we moved into design, and we have one of our designers here from Rochester, and I'd like to introduce you to Ramon.
Thank you, Cindy. Hello, my name is